What follows is yours for free, but it's only part of the entertainment we offer. And if you want to see the whole range and get involved, go to patreon.com/wordinyourear. And now, on with the show.
Well, welcome to another, what is it? Word in your attic, word in your ear, word in your shop. It could be anything. When we started doing these things over 2 years ago, I think our objective was to talk to people who had a lot of records in their house, didn't we, Mark? That was pretty much our objective. And I think this time we really hit the jackpot. We're delighted to be joined by Joel Diath. Hello, Joel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Joel is in a place in a house in East London. I think that's fair to say. I won't be any more specific than that. It's got a lot of records in it, hasn't it, Joel?
It has.
Do you ever keep a count on how many you've got there?
Oh goodness, I'd say it's definitely in the 5 figures range. What around sort of 15 to 20,000 range? I don't know. It's too much. What I do know is that what's in my own personal collection, which is around 2,000, but then there's everything else.
There's everything else. So it's the everything else, particularly that we're going to focus on today, because this is also the kind of headquarters of Brighter Day vinyl, which people may have come across on Twitter or on social media or whatever, because Joel's been very active in acquiring lots and lots of old records and rehoming them, I think is the expression they actually use.
Finding good homes for them, that's it.
Good homes for them.
Well, every record deserves a good home.
Well, there you go. And so we're looking into that. Now, what we traditionally do is ask people when we start these chats is, can you remember, just to get an idea, can you remember what was the record playing equipment in your home when you were a child?
Oh, goodness me. No, well, my dad had a really... I can't remember the make, but I remember he had a beautiful turntable, beautiful speakers, but he would often just sit in front of the turntable with his headphones on and just lose himself in the music. But I can't remember the make, but it was like a proper turntable with a weight on the back, and it was...
Right, so it was proper.
Don't touch.
Don't touch, don't even look.
Don't breathe.
2p bit on the arm to keep it down.
No, probably not. Probably far too.
Probably not, actually. No, it's true.
So what kind of stuff did he listen to?
Oh, sort of 60s, 70s, everything beat onwards, really. But then huge fan of Floyd, Zeppelin, Sabbath. I grew up on Sabbath.
Right. So you actually had a dad who'd sit in the sound room in the front and lose himself in Atom Heart Mother. You see, Mark and I can't imagine that because we're far too old.
We're too old. We didn't have that. We're really envious.
I can't imagine what that was like at all. So what was the first record you got yourself?
Well, I was trying to find it and I couldn't because I guess this is showing my age. It was a Megadeth cassette tape.
Right,
okay.
So it would have been at school. I would have saved my money. I would have got the bus to Walthamstow and I would have bought Euthanasia by Megadeth on cassette. And I remember it being a moment because I grew up in a house full of music and this was my music and it very much set the tone. But I wanted to cheat because I thought about like my first record and I thought, I wonder if I can cheat and say like the first record I ever stole. Not that exciting, like stole from my brother. And I have it here.
Go on.
Oh, this is good.
Oh, Guns N' Roses. Okay. Is that the double album? It is it?
No, this is the debut.
Appetite that's the first one. Okay. Yep. Appetite for Destruction. Yeah.
Because for me, there was a sort of, it was the moment before I heard Appetite for Destruction and the moment after I heard Appetite for Destruction when I was about 11 years old were very profound moments. And I just stole my brother's tape, listened to it constantly and become a man to listen.
I went in a boy, I came out a man. That's right.
So such a profound effect.
Yeah.
So you ended up working in the music business.
That's correct.
In what capacities?
Right. So I was very fortunate. I did a whole host of work experience placements. I didn't know anyone in the music industry. All I knew was that I was a music obsessive. And I loved music and I was always going to gigs. And I did a bunch of music work experience placements and called a marshal of Infectious Records, Mushroom Records, he took me under his wing. And with Corda, I worked for about 5 years, and I worked as his sort of A&R scout, his runaround. So for about 5 years, I saw thousands and thousands of bands, the Dublin Castle, and the Barfly, and the Falcon, and running around Camden, then running around East London, and would find bands for him, and had a good run for a while. Mushroom and Infectious Records was acquired by Warner, so I was an A&R manager for Atlantic Records, which was an absolute dream come true, considering some of the artists that worked on Atlantic.
So who were you dealing with at Atlantic?
So I was part of the team that brought in and signed The Darkness. It was probably the biggest act I had a part of working with, which was a bit crazy for a while because they were quite big.
They were huge. That must have been a wonderful feeling when you watch a thing like that just take off internationally.
It was overwhelming. I was not prepared for it, and I say not prepared. Not that I thought I played no role. I think for a while I was kind of known as the kid who discovered the darkness, and that was quite overwhelming. And I was not prepared for it. I was not prepared for the sort of attention that brings someone. I was more content going to Sheffield and Leeds trying to find dodgy emo bands because I loved emo music. I loved the emotional hardcore scene. I loved heavy metal. So I ended up working with some acts, one called Funeral for a Friend from South Wales. I had a lot of fun with. And another artist called Get Cake, Wear Cake, Fly.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. But I definitely think of myself as a kid who kind of got lucky, and I was not prepared, and I wasn't perhaps looking after myself, and I was perhaps behaving as poorly as some of the bands that I was following.
Oh, right. Okay. So you came to a point where you didn't want to do that anymore.
Well, I didn't have a choice. Atlantic fired me, and I ended up in band management. And I managed a number of bands, the biggest being a band called The Joy Formidable from North Wales. And we toured the world. That was a lot of fun. And then that didn't work out. So then I joined Sony Music, and I relaunched a label for them called Music for Nations, which was a classic heavy metal label from the 80s and 90s. And I relaunched Music for Nations for Sony, and I reissued a bunch of catalogue, and then we started to sign new acts. And then I was let go from them. And then there comes this point where you kind of go, oh, there's a theme here. There's a theme.
Serial dismissal.
And it provokes a lot of self-reflection, and you kind of go, what's going on? Because I have a talent with music and artists and bands, but there's something that kind of keeps on reenacting. And then that led to the last 5 years of my life, which is sobriety, becoming a psychotherapist, and buying and selling secondhand records.
So the latter two kind of work together, don't they? I'm interested in this. You see, you've got the secondhand record business, which is your way of kind of subsidizing your training and redirecting yourself into psychotherapy. Is that fair to say? That
is fair to say. I never knew how expensive it would be to train to become a psychotherapist. It's enormously expensive. And I needed to find something else to do that could pay for it. And I toyed with managing with bands, but managing bands it's all encompassing. It's too much. It's so overwhelming to look after someone's career. I take it very seriously. And any time I've worked with a band, I've wanted to give it my all, and I knew I couldn't split that.
Right.
So my father gave me his record collection. That led to me this growing interest of records. I started to buy collections, and then I started to sell the odd record, and then I realized that I absolutely loved it. I loved the whole process of sourcing records, buying them, and then selling them. And I ran a little shop with a friend.
Yeah, you had a physical shop, didn't you?
Briefly,
as well as Have you still got that?
No, we kind of split our businesses about 2 years ago, because I wanted to run things a bit differently, and I had my psychotherapy training, and there was this moment where I thought I could run a shop, and I had this ambition of being the sort of Banquet of the East, because Banquet Records, I love what they do. They do new stock, obviously, and they do the in-stores. And I thought there's nothing like that in Essex. But again, I saw a path which meant a tremendous amount of work, a lot of involvement, and I didn't know that I could do that and the psychotherapy. So I thought, well, what aspect of what I do I love the most? And it was buying secondhand records, and it was music discovery. And thus I just decided to do it myself, and we split the businesses. My old colleague still runs a shop up the road, and then I run what I run here from my house.
So basically, what you do, if I can understand this, is you if people want to buy records from you, they contact you via WhatsApp. They get on a WhatsApp group, yes, and then on Thursday evenings, very exciting. I saw this last Thursday. You publish on WhatsApp a load of videos of you flicking through your most recent acquisitions. Is that fair to say? And then if people want those at those prices, they contact you via WhatsApp, and so you sell them. You've got all the parts of the service of a shop, other than the actual shop. Is that fair to say?
Thursday nights, 7:30 on BBC One, Top of the Pops. No,
Don't touch that dial.
Thursday nights, 7:30. It's the Flip Through Thursday, which I've been running now for 2 years, and that's it. What used to be like a box of records is now 8-9 boxes of records, all priced up, all graded up, all ready to be bought, and then that gets published to WhatsApp. And
where are you buying them from? Are you buying them at fairs, or buying them from individuals, or as you say, acquiring whole collections? Or?
I'm acquiring whole collections. So I have adverts that are everywhere. So if you've inherited a collection, or you're downsizing, or you just don't want to play your records, or you don't play your records anymore, I get lots of calls from people who say, this is the third time we've moved in 20 years, and the boxes of records have still stayed in the boxes. We've not taken them out. We just don't listen to them anymore. So it's things like that. And people who have passed away. So I get calls from house clearance people and relatives of people who have died. So I travel all over the country to see wonderful record collections. Some I'm fortunate enough to acquire. I bring them all back here, work my way through them, and price them up, and they go into the Flick Through Thursday.
Give us some examples of things that you...
Let's go through this process. So somebody gets in touch with you and says, I'll get rid of a load of my records, and then I live in North Wales or whatever, How do you decide whether what they've got is worth you going to have a look?
Well, it's just using the technology that's now available. So I'll often, as quick as possible, try and get the conversation onto WhatsApp, because then it's so easy to share photos or share videos.
Right.
Get the idea that it's a genuine collection that's not been already cherry-picked from every distant relative.
Oh, right.
It's not just the Max Bygraves, but a genuine collection that's just been kept together. And I will travel. I'll go up, I'll take a closer look, I'll check the condition, I'll make an offer.
Do you have to kiss a lot of frogs, as they say, to get a decent collection?
I've gone to the second and third base with a lot of frogs. But it's part of the job, and I think it's you very much get a good idea when you're speaking to someone.
Right.
And you just kind of get this, I call it the spidey sense, and I'll get an idea and I go, this is the real deal. This is a proper collection. Because you'll have people who, if their first words out of their mouth are, I know what I've got, you're not going to rip me off. You're like, he's got a load of crap. He's going to have a load of crap. Because he would have already had people come over and offer him not much for not good records, and they're ready with that patter. But if you have someone who says, look, I'm downsizing, I need to shift my records, I'm moving, I can't be bothered to take my records again, or a family member has passed away, I have some records, and you come take a look. I'll go, okay, let's, what can I hear? What can you tell me? And then I'll travel.
Give us some examples of things that you've found you've been particularly excited about.
Oh, there's so many. And it's it gives me just tingles to think about some of the collections I've seen, and some I've been fortunate enough to buy, and some I haven't. I'll always remember the collection I went and saw in Wembley, which it's. I try and think about. It's such an exaggeration, but it's like the Indiana Jones of vinyl. It's like, I get my whip, get my hat on, and I'm like, off I go, right off to Wembley. And I was shown into an outhouse which must have had, oh goodness, 15, 20,000 records.
Really?
Wow.
And they were all shelved up. And 1/3 of the collection was Bollywood records.
All right.
And the one aspect of this job I adore is that I've discovered entire musical genres I didn't know existed. It's not like I found the odd band and go, oh, that's an interesting band. I never knew they were around. I find out about entire genres. I never knew about acid folk. I never knew about acid folk. I knew about folk music, but I didn't know about acid folk.
No.
And now I think, how did I manage to get so far in life without discovering acid folk?
Well, because it was only invented quite recently, wasn't it?
It wasn't that name. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, right. So it was I understand what you're saying now, but it was a name given to a particular genre in the late 60s. But it's the bands from the 60s I've never heard of, Bread, Love and Dreams, and, well, I guess Tyrannosaurus Rex would have been discovered as...
It's like Mark and I have been talking about this recently. Right. You know, all these groups like Trees, who at the time, we remembered Trees.
Yes.
It was never a big deal at all.
The Garden of Jane Delaunay. But now, there we are. You see, that it really interests me, because if you follow this stuff that we do, then little Vogue suddenly appear. And that kind of psychedelic folk appears to be one of them, isn't it? I mean, Trees are now immensely, that record and On the Shore, Mark Fry and, Dreaming with Alice and records like that have been completely forgotten for you. No, you haven't.
That's another great example of one. That's Justine, like just a one-off folky, proggy thing from the late 60s, UK, made one album.
You see, take that. That's a really good example. Just hold that up a second. Now, I'm an old git and I've worked in record shops for years and I've got really good memory. I've never seen that record. I've never heard of that record. How many copies of that record will have been pressed? And what was the record company?
And what's the record called again?
Justine.
Justine.
Yeah, and it's a self-titled. It's on Uni, so it's on the label Neil Young. It's on Uni Records. I would have thought they would have pressed a few thousand.
Right. And when did it come out?
Oh, that was late 60s.
So is the value for a record like that as much to do with the fact that there are so few copies in existence as the fact that it's, interesting to listen to? I mean, it must be just the collectability, mustn't it? If there's only a few thousand.
I like it. It's a fantastic early proggy, folky thing. I think there's undeniably appeal to that sense that there's not many out there. And as we know, that you'll be written about on certain online forums and blogs about the record that you've not got. I mean, the great example is the Vashti Bunyan record.
Yes.
No, absolutely.
Which it's, I think it was rumored there's only 300. It's on Philips. I mean, there's a label at the time, but I think they only printed 300. Become incredibly desirable. Documentaries made, the reissues are made, and then original copies are so hard to come by.
Such a good story too, isn't it? The horse and cart.
It's also the kind of, what fascinates me is the kind of invention of rarity, because I used to work in record shops in the 70s, and when stuff got deleted, it just disappeared. And it didn't reappear. Nobody reissued it. And now, compared to that, we live in an era of total availability of absolutely everything at the flick of a switch. Therefore, the value of things that you can't get just grows all the time, doesn't it? And it's like you say about those, those websites and, that where people like Vashti Bunyan and Trees are absolute superstars. They're constantly driving the interest, aren't they, in these tiny areas that you didn't know much about? Yeah,
it's something I often find myself thinking so much about, having worked in the music industry before the internet and then after, and how this availability of certain things, but then also the scarcity of other things, or you're becoming aware of things that were just forgotten about, but now they become quite desirable. It's a really peculiar mixture.
It is.
I think it's about what drives you and what drives you as a music fan and as a vinyl fan.
Yeah.
And what part of it is it being a collector? What part of it is about being a music lover? And I think I've got to a certain point where, for me, it's a combination of the two. I love the scarcity. I love that idea of finding a record. Because when I saw that in a collection of records I bought, I'm like, I'm never going to see this record ever again. And here it is, under someone's stairs, down the road from where I used to live. This is what the story of this is just unbelievable. I paid a fortune for that collection. And the guy almost fainted when I offered. So, how much? I said, you've got an incredible record collection and I really want it. And I'm going to keep most of it myself. But, you know, it's glorious. I was talking about Wembley. I got completely distracted.
Oh, right. Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's somewhat linked. It's these very normal looking houses which house, you know, they're libraries of records. And what I loved so much about this collection I saw in Wembley was I was in my element because the people left me alone and I was there for 5 hours going through as many of these records I could. They'd occasionally come bring me a cup of tea and biscuits. Glorious. They offered me dinner. I turned that down. But as long as I'm there with my phone and I'm jumping on eBay, Discogs, Spotify, YouTube, just to kind of get as much information as possible. Sometimes it's sad when I don't get a collection, but I just think, what an honor just to have a little, see a part of this person's life, because that's what a record collection is.
Mm.
A Spotify playlist it says so much, but to make that commitment of that, buying the record, keeping it, putting it on the shelf, you can tell a lot by someone by their record collection. And I get to see many people's lives through their record collections. I was shown out of their outhouse in Wembley, and then they go, "Oh, we're not finished," and they showed me into another room where there was like another 5,000 records, all sealed.
Sealed.
They were a hoarder, and they just bought and bought and bought and bought, and they were box sets, all sealed. And I offered an eye-watering amount of money, and then I later found out that a rather large, famous London store with multiple stores offered way more than I even offered, and they got the collection. But it's like the one that where I bought the Vashti Bunyan. There's this little. I walk past this house, and it just looks like a normal house. And you open up, and through their records, you can see someone's entire life story.
Yeah,
and it's somewhat heartbreaking to buy that and then separate it, but then I get all a little bit sort of grandiose. I kind of think I'm just a temporary custodian for these sound vessels. My job is if you look after these records, they will outlast all of us. So my job is to find the ones that aren't loved anymore, give it a bit of TLC, find it a new home where it will continue to be loved, and it will be loved by the person who gets it after that, and loved by the person that is loved after that. And what a part of, I'm playing a part of this records journey, and that I absolutely adore.
You started a thing in lockdown, I think, where you were the kind of mystery vinyl packages where you talked to people and you got some idea of what their musical taste was, and then you sent them a selection of stuff you'd chosen that if they thought they might like. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I did that with my old colleague in the old shop, and that was so much fun. Because
that's a brilliant thing.
People can go to record shops. They couldn't browse. They couldn't take a punt. They couldn't go, "Oh, that looks interesting." So we just tried to be that for them through these monthly packs. And it was a lot of fun. It was also a lot of pressure, because when you'd been sending records to the same person for about 18 months, if I only sent that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it became too much. And that's when for me, the flick throughs,
so it's a kind of evangelism, isn't it?
Evangelism.
Yeah, just trying to kind of turning people on to stuff. Can you give us some examples of records that you connected people with and they were particularly excited about?
The one that always comes to mind is that I sent someone a record by a band called the Nightingales, which were like a jingly jangly 80s indie band. And he's like, "That's my new favourite band ever. You've introduced me to my new favourite band." And I was like, "Wow, that's been on the shelf for a good while. We weren't able to sell it. This is great."
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But you get an idea what people like, and occasionally it really hits. And I was really always expecting every month for a bunch of people to say, "Going to send these back." But more often than not, people are like, "Well, you're not quite right for me this month, but it's fine. It will sit nicely on my shelf." And you're like, "Oh, okay." So I think people were really into the idea, even if they weren't always into the records we sent them.
So let's talk about prices. You've got a David Bowie record behind you there.
First press, stereo, UK.
Okay. How much if you were selling that?
If I was selling that, I that's one of the better ones I've seen. I think that would be edging towards 1,000.
Really?
Yeah.
So you say first press. It's over. So yeah, tell us the characteristics that make you think it's worth that much. You say first pressing. How do you know?
So there's a lot of little telltale signs,
right?
And there's online. There's people with a lot more time on their hands than me who will tell you what was a first press, what was a second press. I think the first thing you always look for are the matrix numbers.
It's the matrix numbers, right?
Which are the numbers written in the dead wax of the groove.
Yeah.
And obviously those will tell you what stamper was used to make that record at that time. But then there's sometimes some little variations on the label, in the center of the record, and there's variations on the sleeve. So, and then people who have, again, got more time than I have will do a bit of research about what labels they use. Was it a rough texture or a smooth texture? Why were the first 500 rough? Why were the next ones smooth?
Oh God, it's so complicated.
Well, you see, what's fascinating?
This makes the wine business look like a pushover.
But what's fascinating to me about this is in the days when vinyl was the thing, because there was nothing else, nobody ever talked about any of those things. Ever. Not ever. And it's just in the last 10 years, it's a field of, people's interest. It's absolutely fascinating. Well, I interviewed the guy when I wrote my book about the LP. I talked to the guy who used to run EMI pressing plant at Hayes. So he ran it for 20 years, through the 60s and 70s. I said, "You must have loads of white labels and autographed records." He said, "Not a single one. Not a single one. I could have had everything." He said, "Nobody ever thought of it at all."
They were mere vessels. They were the idea of you just getting the music to your ears.
Yeah, of course it was.
It's the sense of we've created a culture around something that didn't at the time mean much. And I paused as I was talking because my family history, my grandfather was an antiques dealer when antiques dealing wasn't really a thing. And I often make this comparison. When they're making sugar bowls in the 1600s, they're just making sugar bowls to hold sugar.
Yeah, sure.
And then over time, they're like, "Well, that's 200 years old. I'm not going to put sugar in that anymore." So there's undeniably an aspect of that. And we live in a culture where everything's about collecting. Well, I said everything. And what comes to my mind there is I'm fascinated by the NFT market. I'm fascinated by Pokemon cards. I'm fascinated by these people who are collecting things, and especially things that are connected to their youth, because this is where my psychotherapy brain kind of kicks in. They're trying to recapture something. They're trying to reconnect with a part of themselves that they're not connecting with anymore. Mm. They're trying to hold on to a feeling which may have long since gone. And for that brief moment where they're holding something that takes them back to that moment, they brought comfort. They brought a bit of calm. And I think a lot of people are like that with vinyl records. The difference with vinyl records is that you can play them.
Yes.
There's something that really genuinely is real about it. And I won't get into the debate of does a vinyl record sound better than an MP3 or a CD, because I don't deal in that aspect of things.
No.
I love product. And for me, the fact that records are fallible, the fact that they can be scratched, and covers can be written on, for me just adds to the joy, because it's something about getting a record which has Julie Liverpool, and you're like, this was someone's treasure.
Well, it's yours. You see, the thing about the great weakness of CDs is they were never yours. your copy of, whatever, classic CD looked the same as absolutely everybody else's. Whereas in the age of the LP, everybody's felt slightly different.
It felt different.
Because they were all slightly older or slightly newer.
Slightly different colours.
Yes.
Occasionally different pressings and different typographies.
Yeah.
Coffee stains, just idiosyncrasies.
And people would write on them, absolutely. All
Yeah.
And,
it's funny as well because...
But doesn't that devalue it if somebody has written? So if you're selling that coffee...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's still... You find that attractive.
Well, it's they were used. They were. I mean, anything sadder than a toy still in its packaging. I mean, it's just like a poor toy stuck behind a plastic. Star Wars, unplayed, unloved.
Yeah.
And I will sometimes look through a record collection, and I'm looking at some of the most sought after records you've ever seen, and they are written across, they're scratched, and you're like, well, they were well loved. And they were used for what they were meant to be used for. I can't buy them, unfortunately, but I've gone online and these are worth thousands. Yes, these ones aren't worth thousands. If they're in good condition, they're worth thousands. These ones are just too difficult to rehome.
So is that generally the problem with people who are selling you stuff, that people trying to, they always think things are worth more than they are?
I've encountered that. I've encountered people who, I recently bought a collection, and as I walked in, the guy goes, I was up all night and I've looked online and these are worth thousands and thousands of pounds. And he held up a Moody Blues record and goes, this is on sale online for £350. And it was like the Moody Blues, one of the millions of albums they released. Yeah. And you're like, there is likely someone on eBay right now asking for £350 for that record.
Whether they'll
he
get
will
it.
likely be asking for £350 in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time. And it's difficult because you hold that position of knowledge, and you also understand that you're deflating someone. Yeah. They think they've found their way out of, a way of paying their life for the next few years or whatever. And you're kind of going, I'm ever so sorry. I can make you an offer, but I think it's going to be considerably less than what you think. But
they're just, you can understand it. All they want to do really is just to give you the impression that they do know roughly what the value of these things are. So they might not be taking advantage of, not that you would take advantage of them. Well, that's, I guess, what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think there's a lot of fear. I mean, I think what I have tried to do with Brighter Day is that I've tried to find a middle ground between the people who are nameless and faceless, and they will advertise, they'll go to people's houses, they will buy collections, and they say, I'm doing you a favour by getting rid of these for you. And the big shops who are very well known in Soho and other second-hand record shops. And I tried to find that middle ground, because I'm very proud of my brand, and I spent a lot of time and effort making sure that people can trust me. I think the fact that there's a lot of ethics involved when you're training to be a psychotherapist. So, I make sure people know that I have other interests and I do other things. So when you're sitting in front of someone and you're going through their records, you say, they're likely worth this, and thus I can offer you this. And there's always many ways to skin a cat. Sometimes I've sat in front of record collections and gone, these two records are worth this. The rest are worth this. So I'm going to sell these two for you, and I'm going to give you everything I make. But these ones you're going to accept my very reasonable offer for, because they're going to take longer to sell.
So are they surprised by the things they've got that are valuable? They're very often not the ones they think are valuable, is that?
Well, I think they coincide valuability with popularity.
Yeah.
But that's a Beatles record. Well, they printed a lot of them.
Yes, they did quite well.
Yeah.
So there's that people marry up things that don't usually, measure up.
So when you're called out, and you're very often, people have been bereaved, and there's dad's record collection like mine, whatever, in the attic, and they want to get rid of it, which must be interesting and poignant in its own way. What are the kind of things that you're hoping might be there? Do you have Vashti Bunyan you talked about, earlier on. Is there stuff you're always looking for? You're thinking, I'm eventually going to come upon a copy of this, that, or the other.
What occurs to me immediately is just a genuine collection, a collection that's not been picked through dozens of times, and you're left then with the remnants of what was.
So you can tell when that's happened, can you?
Yeah. Well, when you see a record collection and you see, I'm seeing everything but the Beatles, and they're like, oh, yeah, the cousins come over and took the Beatles. Yeah. I knew this was missing the Beatles or Pink Floyd or something.
Yeah.
But what am I looking for? I think...
Yeah, there must be a Holy Grail, mustn't there? There must be a few records that you just think I'd love to get, like that Vashti Bunyan.
That was an absolute Holy Grail. I mean, I bought a reissue just a month before, thinking I'm never going to find an original, and the vinyl gods blessed me that day. For me, going through a big folk phase, it's just nice original folk like Shirley Collins and anything David Graham, just like it's just a joy. You
got folk roots, new roots I can see down there.
Yeah, it's an absolute joy.
Is that really valuable now?
Originals, yeah.
Originals.
Yeah, a few hundred perhaps. That's an Australian original because they printed it in UK, New Zealand and Australia for some reason. So that's an original. Yeah. Just authentic collections, because for me, I try to cater for everyone's tastes. And also, I'm not in a position to turn down a collection just because it's not my type of music. One of the most significant collections I bought was a reggae collection. And the knowledge I gained by the time I reached the end of that collection, working my way through it and learning about Studio One and the different various pressings. And you just take it all on board. And I grew up in a house full of music, and I worked in the music industry for 20 years, and I've learned more running record shops in 4 years than I did.
Well, it's the great truth about music is that if you know a lot about it, all you mainly know is how little you know. Because there are a whole other worlds over there that you will never have time to get into, and unless work brings you into contact with it. You recently bought the collection of the late Roger St. Pierre, who was a kind of journalist, collector, expert on kind of soul and R&B. Is that fair to say? So was that his family in touch with you? How did this work?
Yeah, so his son-in-law got in touch. He'd been following me on Twitter for a while. Roger had passed away, and he reached out to say they're working through his estate. Some items are going to go to auction, some items we're going to keep, and then there's the other items. At some point, would you like to come take a look? And it took a while because there was lots of other things that took priority, understandably. And then on Christmas Day, I got a message saying, I think we're ready for you to come take a look.
Christmas Day.
Wow.
Ho, ho, ho.
Yeah.
So I made arrangements soon into January, and I went down to Kent to a storage lockup, and the son-in-law was, we hope they're for you. And I opened the storage locker, and I was presented by about 14 boxes full of records. And within the first box, I saw just everything I look for: authenticity, originals, and it's soul, it's blues, it's R&B, and it's just everything had Roger's name in the top right-hand corner, and then Roger on the label wrote his name, and I just saw that as just a wonderful slice of authenticity. Well, treasured UK music journalist, this was his copy.
Yeah.
And I asked, and I got to meet Roger's daughter who joined us. I said, would you mind if I told people? I mean, they're going to know because his name's on it. If I tell people this was from Roger's collection? And she gave me permission. And I've had so much fun communicating that to the people buying records from me. That this was owned by Roger St. Pierre. And they've taken great joy in that, because they've then shared with me what it means to have bought a record from Roger's collection. So it's not Julie from Liverpool, although I find love in that. And, Julie from Liverpool wrote her name on her copy of Meet the Beatles. But I think there's just that what is it we do when we're collectors? Just want a bit of authenticity, to feel a bit more connected. And I was very fortunate, because whilst Roger's family had taken out some specific items, they also left some absolute treasures. And I found a number of signed Marvin Gaye records, a number of signed James Brown records, and Little Richard. And I think, I don't wish to speak for us all here, but I'm confident to think that we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for Little Richard. And there was a Little Richard signed record. And to hold something, I'm finding a bit emotional, to hold something that was once touched and signed by Little Richard, why I do what I do.
You must spend a huge amount of time at the post office.
In my Christmas card to them this year, I put, "You are the closest I have to work colleagues."
I bet.
And the eyes, the rolling eyes, and the record man's here.
Okay. Would you like to recommend a good time of day to go in your post office?
There's no such thing.
There isn't, is there?
There's no such thing. Every time I think I found the method, it's at this time. I walk in and there's a huge queue, and I do all my postage at home. So we're going straight from Postage, from Little Richard to Postage.
Right, it's all part of the thing.
I do all my postage at home, and although I just go there to drop off, I never like to jump the queue because I think it's unfair. So I'll queue up just to drop off. But the groans of people behind me as I'm there,
it's not bad
because they think you're about buying postage stamps for South America.
What you've got to do one of these days is when you go in there and you post all your stuff and you got all the people standing behind you sighing, and you get to the final package, and then you go, "Oh yes, and I'd like to change my nationality."
The old Kipper Williams cartoon. It was.
Still makes me laugh. That's brilliant. So, do you think is now a kind of perfect time, in the sense that the kind of baby boomers are reaching the point where they shuffle off this mortal record collection, and it's possible?
Yeah, Danny Baker's a good example. Yes. There's Danny Baker. He's very publicly selling. I can't remember how many it is. 12,000 albums.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, huge number.
I mean, it's not going to go on forever, is it?
I had a number of people message me saying, "Are you buying Danny Baker's collection? Are you buying Danny Baker?"
I'm sure.
And unfortunately not. I DM'd him a couple of times because he's threatened to sell his collection for a while. I said, maybe we can come to an arrangement. But even I have my limits. I sometimes go see collections, and I think the Wembley one was a good example, where it's like, I only have so much room. So I think what I've discovered when I've gone to families where someone's passed away, and if there's still a sort of 50s into early 60s, I went and saw a collection not too far from here in Chingford, and well, aside from they said they had 30,000 VHS tapes. I mean, the house was just crammed full of stuff. They had about 800 records, and from what I could gather, they bought them, put them in a plastic sleeve, put them on a shelf, and never touched them again. It was just immaculate. And I was thinking, if this was 60s into early 70s, I'd possibly be looking at one of the greatest record collections in my life. But it was 50s, just into the 60s. So there was loads of country. If you wanted that Conway Twitty album in mint condition, I'm your man.
Aren't you, man? Well, you see, there may be a demand eventually. You see, you never know.
There may be, but there was a slither of 60s, some early Beatles, and they were just in wonderful condition. But there wasn't. I bought the collection because I thought there's enough here, but. I'm thinking in about 5 to 10 years' time, I'm going to be seeing the collections which are, 60s into early 70s. Not quite there yet, but some of the calls I get are that, but the people tend to be still around and they're moving or they're having to downsize.
Yeah. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So look, the way we traditionally wind up these conversations, and we could go on for all day on this because I'm absolutely fascinated. What is, in your opinion, the greatest record ever made? Do you know the answer? I just
happen to have one here, sir. Yeah. Oh, okay. Which was the first record? The first record you bought?
Oh, well.
It's too intertwined with my my
memories.
But I had my number 2 favorite album of all time.
Oh, I can't remember.
Oh yeah, go on.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay.
Siamese
great cover.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream, for me, very much linked to my teenage self, my teenage life. For me, sonically, produced by Butch Vig, who did Nevermind, and he was in Garbage. It's one of the most delicately hedonistic. It's so dynamic. At one moment, there's so much going on, and then at other moments, it's so delicate and quiet and intimate. And for me, it's a perfect audio representation of what my teenage life was like. It's just crazy, and then it was delicate, and then it was fast, and then it was slow. And there are records which feel like they're a part of me. And Siamese Dream is a band that I feel is like a part of me. So I will always have a very closeness to that record. And I do love Smashing Pumpkins. I always kind of see Billy Corgan as a bit like Samson. He lost all his powers when he lost his hair. So those first few Smashing Pumpkins albums were very emotive and deep. And then I think the rock star was erupted, and
I'd never heard that theory before.
Yeah, that's very
I'm all in favour of that. I'm hair-based theories of popular music.
Yeah.
I'm always in the market for.
And Pumpkins are one of the few bands that I get a little bit crazy with. So I have the original test pressing of Siamese Dream.
Right.
With
we haven't even talked about test pressings and white labels and so forth. That's got to be for another time. Meanwhile, Joel, thank you very much for talking to us. And if people wanted to get in touch with you, you're happy for them to join your Flick Through Thursdays, 7:30. Is that the case?
Thursday, BBC One. They're very welcome, of course. Yeah, Brighter Day Record Shop. You'll find me on a social near you.